What is a percentage? The word percent comes from the Latin percentum, which literally means out of 100. Percentages are represented by this symbol here. Now, suppose we have this grid which is made up of 100 squares, right? And we start shading in some shapes. Now, this purple square here, this makes up 1% because it's one square out of 100. This red shape over here is 10% because it's 10 squares out of 100. This blue shape over here is 5% because it's 5 out of 100. And this green shape over here is 25% because it's 25 squares out of 100. So percentages are out of 100, out of 100, and they show us a proportion. Now every percentage can be written as a fraction and a decimal. Now how do we write percentages as fractions? Well, the simplest way is to write it out of 100. So 1% is just 1 out of 100. Now how do we write that as a decimal? Now remember, every fraction is actually a division. So when we have 1 over 100, 1 over 100 there, the numerator is actually also the dividend. And the denominator is actually the divisor. So this fraction here, in other words, is just 1 divided by 100. Now when we divide by 100, what do? We learned that we move the decimal 2 places to the left, 1, 2. So my answer there is 0.01. Going back to this question here, so 1 over 100 is just 0.01. 2% is just 2 out of 100. Now, can we simplify this fraction? Yes, we can, because we can divide the numerator and the denominator by 2, and we have 1/50, 1 over 50. And as a decimal again, it's just 0.02. Now, 5% is 5 out of 100, which can be simplified. We can divide the numerator and the denominator by 5, and we get 1/20. And as a decimal, it's just 0.05. Now 10% is 10 out of 100, which can be simplified to 1/10 by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 10, and as a decimal is 0.1. Now notice the difference between 1% and 10%. 1% is 0.01 and 10% is 0.1, or sometimes it is written as 0.10. It is exactly the same as 0.1. You have to be very, very careful here. Many times I have seen students make this mistake. They write 1% as 0.1, which is completely wrong. 0.1 is 10%. So be careful about that. Now 25%, again write it out of 100, 25 over 100. It can be simplified to a quarter by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 25, and as a decimal is 0.25. So you can see a pattern here. Now, how do I write a decimal percentage as a fraction? Again, we can write the decimal over 100, so 17.5 to 100, and what we can do is we can multiply the numerator and the denominator by 10 to get rid of the decimal, so that would be 175 over 1000, and then we can start simplifying it. Now if we simplify by dividing the numerator and denominator, let's say here what goes into these numbers, 25, so we divide the numerator by 25, 175 divided by 25 is 7, and 1000 divided by 25 is 40. So 17.5% in its simplest form is 7/40, 7 over 40. And as a decimal is 0.175. Now, what is 6.5% as a fraction? Again, write the decimal over 100, so 6.5 over 100. Multiply the top and bottom, the numerator and the denominator by 10. You have 65 over 1000, and then just find a common factor, divide the numerator and the denominator by a common factor. You can divide the top and bottom by 5. 65 divided by 5 is 13, and 100 divided by 5 is 20, so that's 13/20, and again as a decimal here is 0.065. Now what is 65% as a fraction? Again, write it out of 165 over 100, which can be simplified. We can divide the numerator and the denominator by 5. We have 13 over 13. Let's go back. We made a mistake here. We actually made a mistake here. If we multiply 6.5 by 10, by 10, we have 65, and 100 by 10, we have 1000. We need to be very careful here. So if we divide now 65 by 5, we have 13. Now, 1000 divided by 5. Well, in 100 there are 20 5s, so that's 20 times 10, that's 200. Now, I can't simplify this any further. This, as a decimal, will be 0.065. So again, I made a mistake there. I do apologize. Now, 65% is just 65 over 100, which can be simplified. We can divide the numerator and the denominator by 5, so that becomes 13 over 20, 13/20, and as a decimal is 0.65. Now I want you to notice the difference between 6.5% and 65%. 6.5% is 0.065 and 65% is 0.65. So a clear difference there. Please don't make this mistake. On many occasions I have seen students write 6.5% as 0.65. 0.65 is your 65%, 6.5% is 0.065. Now, what I would say to you is that there are some fractions that we all must memorize. We need to know some fractions and percentages off by heart. And you need to be able to recall them instantly. What are they? Well, 1% is 1 out of 100. 10% is 1/10 in its simplest form. 5% in its simplest form, that's 5 out of 100 in its simplest form, becomes 1/20th. We need to know 20%, which is just a fifth. Now, if we know 20% is a fifth, that means 40% is 2/5. 60% is 3/5, and 80% is 4/5. You have to memorize these. 25% everyone should know is just a quarter. 50% is a half. 75% is 3/4. And what else? Have I missed anything? All right, yep, I just remembered now. We need to know a third, which is 33.3% recurring. And we should know that 2/3 is 66.6% recurring. And we should also know fractions such as 1/8, and 1/8 is just 0.125, which is just 12.5%. So you need to know these fractions and percentages off by heart. It is very, very important. And if you know the percentage, then you should be able to write the percentage as a decimal, as I have shown here. Just write it out of 100 and then just move the decimal to the left. So you have to memorize these fractions off by heart, and you should be able to recall them instantly. Now, imagine this scenario where you have a farm which consists of 50 animals, 20 chickens, 10 turkeys, 5 ducks, and 15 cows. Now, suppose you were asked to write the number of chickens as a percentage of the total. Now, what you should always remember, the total is always your 100%. And the total will always be the denominator. I want you to remember this. So when you are asked to write the number of chickens as a percentage of the total, 20 chickens as a percentage of the total is just 20 out of 50. Again, you see that it's the 50 is the denominator here. 50 is the denominator here. Now, what is 20/50th as a percentage? Again, convert the denominator, the base, into 100. We need to multiply that by 2. So we have to multiply the numerator by 2. We get 40 over 100. Now 40 over 100 is clearly 40%. So the chickens make up 40%. Now we need to do the same for the turkeys. Now the turkeys are 10 out of 50. Once again, we need to convert the base into 100, multiply that by 2, and multiply the numerator by 2, that's 20 out of 100. Now 20 out of 100 is clearly just 20%. 5 ducks, that's just 5 out of 50, which is just multiply the denominator by 2, becomes 100, and the numerator by 2, that becomes 10. So that's clearly 10%. And last but not least, the cows, 15 out of 50, which is just 30 out of 100. I multiplied the numerator and the denominator by 2. So that's 30%. Now, what you should always check is that do all of the percentages, do they all add up to 100%? Do they all add up to 100%? And clearly they do. 40% plus 20% plus 10% plus 30% equals 100%. All percentages must add up to 100. This is very, very important, and you'll see why. A percentage is any proportion or share in relation to the whole. You see here, when we say the chickens makes the chickens make up 40%, the 40% is with respect to the total, is with respect to the total. So 40%, in other words, 40% of 50 is 20. 20% of 50 is 10. 10% of 50 is 5. And 30% of 50 is 15. That is what we mean when we say a percentage is any proportion or share in relation to the whole. Now let's do some questions here. So it says here, always read the question carefully. Fill in the boxes to show equivalent fractions, decimals, and percentages. So the first one, a half, as a decimal is 0.5, and clearly everyone should know that is 50% as a percentage. Now here we have 25%. What is 25% as a decimal? We just did this, so that's 0.25, and as a fraction in its simplest form, as I said, any percentage can be written out of 100, so that's 25 over 100. Now simplify this bit becomes 1/4 by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 4. So that's 1/4. Now we have 0.8. 0.8 is clearly 80%. And as a fraction, again, write it out of 100, so 80 over 100. And we can divide the numerator and the denominator by 10. We have 8/10, and we can further simplify that and write that as 4/5 by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 2. So this becomes 4/5. Let's go to the next question now. It says convert 0.36 into a percentage. So 0.36 is clearly 36 over 100. And as a percentage, that will be 36%. 78% as a decimal. Once again, read the question carefully. 78% to a decimal. 78% is just 78 over 100. And that will be, if we move, when we divide by 100, we move the decimal 2 places to the left, so that's 0.78. Next question. Malachi is doing a 20-mile bike ride. He has cycled 11 miles so far. What percentage of the total distance has he cycled? What percentage of the total distance has he cycled? Remember what I said. Malachi is doing a 20-mile bike ride, so the 20-mile is your total, right? And the total will always be the denominator. Oops, sorry about that. Denominator. So, and he has covered 11 miles so far, so that's 11 out of 20. Now, a fraction in this form is not that meaningful until we convert the denominator into 100. We see what is the multiply. How do we get from 20 to 100? Clearly we multiply that by 5, so that becomes 100. And we need to do the same to the numerator. Multiply that by 5, that becomes 55. So that's 55 over 100, which is just equal to 55%. That's your 55%. Let's go to the next question. Ellis's orchard. In Ellis's orchard, 70% of the trees are apple trees. The rest of the trees are plum trees. So 70% of the trees are apple trees, and the rest are plum trees. So if the rest are plum trees, as I said earlier, all percentage must add up to 100%. Therefore, the plum trees must be 30%. And it says here, what fraction of the trees are plum trees? Well, 30% as a fraction, write it over 100, so 30 over 100, and then start simplifying. We can divide the numerator and the denominator by 10. That becomes 3/10. Can I further simplify it? No, I can't. So that's 3/10. Okay. Let's go to the next question. It says here, draw lines to join each fraction to its equivalent decimal and percentage. Now, let's start off with the fractions here. Treat it as a column. 9/20. What is 9/20 as a percentage? Well, what do I need to do? If I convert the denominator into 100, then I can clearly see what percentage it is. How do I make 20 to 100? The multiplier is clearly 5, so that becomes 100, and we multiply the top by the same multiplier, becomes 45. So that's clearly 45%. Or, as a decimal, it will be 0.45, so that clearly joins to this one there. 12 over 25, once again, we need to see what is the multiplier to make the denominator 100. The multiplier clearly there is 4, so we need to multiply the numerator by 4 as well. So the numerator becomes 48 over 100. Now 48 over 100, apologize about the dodgy 8 there. 48 over 100 is just 48%, or as a decimal, it's just 0.48. Now the last one, an easy one, because we can clearly make 50 to 100 by just multiplying it by 2. We do the same to the numerator, multiply that by 2. That becomes 46 over 100. 46 over 100 as a decimal is just 0.46. Now we can easily join up the decimals to the percentages. I mean, by now you should know that 0.46 is just 46%. 45% is just 0.45, and 48% is just 0.48. And if it helps, on the right hand side you can write each of the percentages out of 100. And there you can clearly see what decimals they will be. Let's go to the next one. Circle 3 equivalent amounts listed below. It clearly states to circle 3 equivalent amounts. You do not want to circle more than 3. If you circle more than 3, you lose all the marks. Now, so equivalent amounts. Well, instantly I can see that 16% as a decimal will be 16 over 100, which is just 0.16, which is clear, which is over there. Now, 16 over 100, as a fraction in its simplest form, we can divide the numerator and the denominator by 4. 16 divided by 4 will be 4, and 100 divided by 4 is just 25, so that's 4/25. Do I have 4/25 here? Yes, I do. It's over there, so we've circled the 3 equivalent amounts. So the next question. Percy and India are washing some cars. Percy has washed 8/25 of all cars. India has washed 35% of all the cars. Who has washed the most cars? Well, as you can see, in order to compare them, we need both of them to be in the form of a percentage or a fraction. Now it's easier to convert the 8/25, the 8 over 25, into a percentage. How do I convert that into a percentage? Again, we need to make the base into 100. How do I make 25 to 100? What is the multiply? The multiply is 4, so that becomes 100. And we do the same to the numerator. We multiply that by 4. That becomes 4 times 8 is 32. So that is 32%. So clearly, India has washed the most cars because India has washed 35%, and whereas Percy has only washed 32%. So we say India has washed, India has washed the most cars. India has washed the most cars. Right, what do I want to show you here? Just rub this off. Okay, working out the percentage of an amount. So suppose they ask you to work out, let's say, 25% of £800. How do I do this? Well, work out, well, first of all, before you do any calculations, 25% can be written as, if we break it down, it's just 10%, another 10%, and 5%. How do I work out 10% of 800? When I want to work out 10% of 800, and I want to work out 10% of any amount, I just need to divide by 10. If I divide 800 by 10, then the decimal will move one place to the left. So 10% of 800 is just £80. And another 10%, so that's £80 again. Now what is 5%? Well, if I know 10% is £80, then, well, 5% is just a half of 10%. So I divide that by 2, and I will get £40. So my 5% is just £40. Now the total, 25%, is just, we add all of this up, 0, 8 add 8 is 16, add 4 is 20, so that's £200. So 25% of £800 is just £200. Now, if you're really smart, you would have noticed that, well, 25% is just a quarter. So in other words, they are asking you to work out a quarter of £800. Now, remember what I taught you. In fractions, of means times. So in other words, a quarter of £800 means a quarter times 800. And when we multiply by a quarter, we can simplify this. Oops, sorry. 800 divided by 4 is just 200. And then 200 times 1 is just 200. So a quarter of £800 is just £200. Now, let's try a more difficult example. Suppose they ask you to work out, let's say, oops, let's make something up. 22.5% of £73. How do we do this? The first thing that you need to realize that, again, the 22.5% can be broken down into 10%, 10%, and 2.5%. You can clearly see that these amounts, they add up to make 22.5%. The question is, how do I work out? We know how to work out 10%. We just divide by 10, so we just move the decimal one place to the left. That becomes £7.30, 7.3, which is £7.30. Please remember, 7.3 is £7.30, not £7.03. It's £7.30. You can leave it as 7.3, or you can put the 0 there. I like to put the 0 there because it helps me visualize the pence more easily. And then another 10%, which is just £7.30. Now, how do I work out the 2.5%? Well, if you remember what we did in class, half of 10% is 5%. So half of £7.30 is my 5%. Now what is half of £7.30? Half of 7 is £3.50. Half of 30 is 15 pence. So that's £3.65. That's your 5%. Now you'll notice that.
So make sure that cup.
You'll notice that half of 5% is 2.5%. So if we halve the 5%, we get 2.5%. So what's half of £3.65? Well, half of £3 is £1.50. Now what's half of 65 pence? You notice that you cannot divide 65, you cannot halve 65 without having a decimal. So what we need to do is we need to round it. So what is 65 divided by 2? Well, 65 divided by 2 is 32.5, and 32.5 rounded to the nearest pence will be 33p. So that's £1.50 plus the 33 pence, which becomes £1.83. So your 2.5% is £1.83. If we are now to total this, start from the right, 0 add 0, 3 is just 3, 3 add 3 is 6, 6 add 8 is 14, 4 they carry the 1 there, 7 add 7 is 14, add 1 is 15, add 1 is 16, so that's £16.43.